which any of us have been involved in customer centricity. So put your hands up if you've been involved in customer centricity. All right? Yeah, well, a good sizable. About a third of us have had some involvement in that. And to me, the Americanism here is that a lot of it is motherhood and apple pie. It's all sweetness and light. It's all about these ideas that the customer's king and the customer's always right, and we should put the customer at the center of everything that we do. Well, those platitudes are all very nice, but at the end of the day, we're in business to actually make money. So I'm not going to be talking about the sort of soft and fluffy stuff and let's put our arms around our customers, whether they're business to business or business to consumer, but let's actually talk about why we're doing it. And there's this phrase that I'll use occasionally, is the triple crown. And the measure of success with doing this stuff I'm talking about is that organizations win the triple crown. They will simultaneously reduce cost, grow revenues, and enhance service. Now, to many of us, those things seem mutually exclusive. I know how to reduce cost, but that could have a negative impact on service. I know how to grow revenues, but that has a negative impact on cost. No, the measure of success with this stuff, and the organizations that we know about and research about and work with ourselves, is that they're winning the triple crown. And so when people say to us, oh, we're doing that customer centricity stuff, we're doing outside in, I will ask you to show me your balance sheet and profit and loss statement, because unless you're showing me a quarter-on-quarter move against those three metrics, whatever it is you're doing, it is an outside in. So that's part of the acid test for this. So it's not about soft and fluffy. It's about the dynamics of running business in a very volatile and dynamic world. So reducing costs, growing revenues, and enhancing service. It's hard and tangible. It's very measurable. Now, the other aspect of that as well is that often many of us who've been involved with process, and you can see I've been a bit long in the teeth around process as well. I was involved in the sort of evolution, if you like, of business process management back when 20 years ago. People were coming out of re-engineering and saying, well, how do we settle it down? How do we do that? Through that sort of, the decades that this thing has been happening, many of us who've worked in process have actually found it quite difficult to go to the CFO and say, look, here's the money. This is how it works. Because process has all been about efficiency, effectiveness, reducing elapsed time. Yeah, sure enough, cutting cost. But cutting cost, is that really going to benefit the business long term? Is it going to help us grow revenues and enhance service? Well, the good news is, and show you this in the slides, is that we can very directly link every single task and activity in the organization right the way through to a successful customer outcome. And in doing that, link it with the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement. So I typically will be invited into a board of directors, and I will say to them, regardless of who it is, guys, is there anybody in the room who's not interested in reducing costs, growing revenues, and enhancing service? And nobody puts their hand up and says, look, my IT projects are more important than that this year. Everybody's on the page for it. So what we're doing around business process, and whether it's BPM, whether it's BPO, the shared services stuff, some of the more evolutionary approaches around innovation in BPO, it's all about this triple crown thing. It's not something elusive, it's something we can demonstrate. Now, to many, outside in talks about achievements of 60, 70, 80% cost reductions, in year one of implementation, which seem absolutely extraordinary. I know certainly in my days as an industrial engineer, if I could get 5 or 10 or 15% against key metrics in a year, I'd get a pat on the back. So when people say to you, no, by doing this stuff, you can take out, double-digit costs, grow revenues, and enhance service, it seems like magic. So when when companies like Apple tell us that every quarter is another record-breaking quarter, you go, oh, yeah. But that's Apple, isn't it? They're unique. They've obviously got some magic going on there. But it's only magic if you don't know the trick. So what is the trick? How do we all get access to that? Well, how we get access to it is probably by rethinking the way we do things at the moment. And what I mean by that is that these organizations who can claim, massive change, and some of you will know of some of the organizations, who claim huge benefits and seem to have this uniqueness about them that everybody else tries to aspire to, and we try and copy we go and read the books and get the business case, and we try to understand it. What is it that they're doing that is different from the rest that gives them this ability to do these remarkable things? Well, it's perhaps not so much that they're doing something remarkably different, it's they're not doing the same thing we've always been doing. So what I mean by that is, let's ask ourselves a couple of questions, is when we're trying to understand who the customer is, they have a very clear line of sight on who the customers are. And they will categorize customers. Now, that isn't to think of segmentation, which some of us might have done from a marketing point of view. It's really to look at the needs of customers. So when we're looking at needs of customers, it's having a very clear line of sight about the specific categories of customer we want to work with. So I'll give you, for example, who uses Apple products? So who's got an iPad, who's got a... Yeah, so about 50-50 there. Now, I dare to bet that those people who didn't put their hands up say, I don't like Apple because it locks me into iTunes. I've got to do everything through iTunes. And I'd much rather have an open service where I can sort of, get music and I can integrate it and things like that. Well, of course, that's by design. Apple have created that infrastructure so they can control their processes and their environment. Now, by definition, if you don't like that, you're not an Apple customer. And Apple won't be pitching to you. Why would they want to do that? They want to reinforce the customers that they've got. So they're very clear, and organizations are getting smarter at really being able to define who is the customer. Not because, like airlines. Classically, they'll say, everybody's our customer. You can't do that today. The world is way too complex. So focusing on customer, and there's a number of techniques and ways of doing it that we talk about and share. I want to just give you some insight, though, into this whole aspect of customer in terms of whether we're looking at internal customers, secondary customers, or primary customers. Primary customers are the guys who pay our wages. They're the ones who create the salaries for us. They're the ones who give our organizations money. They're primary customers. Now, we're going to treat those differently to we'll treat internal customers, other people in our value chain, other people in our organization, for instance. So there's different ways of facing off against these different types of customer. In terms of the different types of customer, one of the questions you can ask yourself is, classically, we would have segmented customers to better understand them. So part of the difference of organizations who get this stuff is they're not doing that anymore. And in fact, Apple are very proud of the fact that they'll tell you that they don't do customer focus groups. They definitely don't go and ask customers what they want. Right? That would be probably one of the worst things in the world they would say you need to be doing. Do not go and ask customers what they want. So part of this, the sort of first question we can put forward is asking that. The other aspect of this is how do you scientifically work out needs of customer when oftentimes the customer doesn't know what they need themselves? You and I as consumers are pretty bad at understanding what 5-10 years ago you might have had a Nokia N95 and you might have said, well, what I want is a bigger screen, bigger keys, I could do with a stylus as well, and I'd like to be able to interact on social networks. And that's precisely what Nokia have gone and done, isn't it? Now, where are they in the world now? 5 years ago, they were the 7th top branded company. They're now not even in the top 100. Well, why would you say that's the case? That's the case because they're going out asking customers what they want. What they need to do is actually figure out what customers need. And you and I as consumers are really poor at articulating that. So we'll talk a little bit more about actually meeting the need rather than meeting the want. Now, I've got it all manned up as well in terms of working on the IT side. I do a lot of business requirements documentation. With the 35,000 other people, we deployed a lot of systems around the planet for Citigroup. And we're a lot of rigor involved in that, in determining what customers say they want. It was only later on, in the last 10 or 12 years, where this phenomenon has occurred, that we realized we're asking the wrong questions. You go and ask them what they want, they'll tell you, you go and deliver it, and they go, yeah, it's okay, yeah, but it doesn't quite do what I need. So why is that? Why do we do that? Well, there's an historical reason for this, and we're all, regardless of where we are on the planet, hooked up to this stuff. So as some of you know, I have an office in Bangalore, so I spend about a third of my time here in India, a good chunk of time in China as well, and that seems to be where the economies are happening. Less so in the States these days, certainly less so in Europe. We've had that discussion already. But wherever you go in the world, we have all inherited an industrial legacy in the way we think and do things. Now, what do I mean by that? So let me just put it out there for any of you who have never come into contact with this before. What shape is your organization in? So if I ask you to draw the organization structure, all right, 95% of the time, we would produce the same shape. So what is that shape? What would it look like? We'd have somebody at the top, and we'd have a sort of what would it be? A pyramid, yeah. We're all in pyramids. We all have this shape. It doesn't matter what business we're in, business to business, business to consumer. We could be a charitable organization, we could be public sector and government. We're all in this shape. Why is that? Now, this shape, what I want you to realize, does not physically exist. And yet it bounds our existence. So much so that if you're talking to people, they'll say, yeah, we're working on these projects at the moment. We're going to take them up to the top team and present them, and then hopefully they'll sign it off, and then we'll cascade it down to the front line. Right? And we talk about value chains and logistic supply chains. Right? But it does not physically exist. We talk about the career ladder. We've got to climb the career ladder. You know, we've got the greasy pole. Our analogies are all about this shape. So why do we structure ourselves in that way? Well, there's an historical reason. It goes back to the beginning of time when we started building pyramids. But in sort of the latter 200 years or so, back in 1776, there was a guy called Adam Smith, who was a Scottish management accountant. Now, anybody from Scotland? No? I didn't think so I can tell you. The Scottish are well known for their affinity to money, and they're not letting it go to anybody else. So, of course, they're very shrewd when it comes to looking after money. And Adam Smith was particularly interested then, back at the start of the Industrial Revolution, in how things were being done. Now, we had a bunch of friends who were in industry, and they were doing sort of industrial things like pin factories, making pins and needles. So he went and observed what they were doing, and his observation included things like, it's chaos. Your efficiency, your output is really based around who you have in on a day-to-day level. What you need to do is structure yourself around the specific tasks and things that you're doing. And so off the factory go and they do that. And as it said now, they increase productivity by 3,000%. Adam Smith introduced us to the concept of the division of labor. And subsequently, the subdivision of labour. So the two go hand in hand. Now, what does that mean? It means we organise ourselves into specialisms, and we get very good at doing that specialist activity. And in the pin factory, back in 1776, there were 18 discrete specialisms. Now, if Adam Smith could teleport himself in a time machine to us today and came into the back of the room and he was wearing his Scottish gear and a kilt and carrying his bagpipes, he would look at our world and he would say, this is frankly amazing. All these people from all these different places, the clothes, the technology, the cars, the infrastructure. So pray tell me, with everything that's happened in the last 200 years, how do you organize yourselves to do the work that you do? And we'd have to actually meekly say, well, Mr. Smith, we thought your ideas were so fantastic back in 1776 that we're still using them today. The guy would think we were nuts, wouldn't he? He would say, no, we did that for 18 discrete tasks in a pin factory. Pray tell me you're not still doing that today. That's the reality for most of us. We're still organizing ourselves into the subdivision of labor. Now, many of us see that through we talk about functional specialist silos and all that. That's the manifestation of it. So let's have a look at what that does to us in terms of organization, thinking, and doing. Some of you will recognize this organization. Who is it? This is a chart from 1917. At that time, the organization had been around 5 years, and it's celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. IBM, okay? And interestingly enough, when you look at the chart, it's actually got a systems division on the chart which relates to people doing work in the organization around process. It's quite remarkable if you think about 100 years ago. But there's one thing missing from that chart. What's missing from that chart? It's the reason why it exists. It's the customer. There is no customer mentioned on the chart anywhere. Well, you'd say, well, yeah, but why do we need the customer on the chart? Well, they're the people who pay our wages. They're the reason why we work. Now, remember, we've already said this is an abstract. It's not real. It's an illusion about how we collectively organize ourselves. Now, it's a sort of modern-day picture, which is fairly representative. It's got marketing, operations, finance, and a bunch of other things on there as well. And with us, we relate to each other, isn't it? Our reward systems, we pay each other. Our relationship in terms of the work that we do. So whether this is a functional organization or it's part of your, if you like, your ecosystem in terms of the clients that you work with, they all look the same. They all go from the top to the bottom. All right? Now, the CEO at the top, how many of our CEOs actually know about the work we really do at a day-to-day level? Are they too busy sort of facing outwards to the market and the shareholders and people like that? Whereas the people in the organization who have to get on with doing things are all in these functional specialist silos. Now, the other aspect of this, let's bring it home, let's talk about process. Wherever you go in the world, processes go from the left to the right. Why is that? Why do all processes, all our diagramming systems, all our IT systems go from the left to the right? Right? Why don't they go from the right to the left? Or why don't they go in circles? Right? Well, they go from the left to the right simply put because that's a Scottish pin factory. It's a production line. It's a factory. Input, activity, output. Right? And the whole world is organized on that principle. All the software systems we use, all our IT, our HR systems, left to right and top to bottom. And when we draw those sort of diagrams and we think to ourselves, well, where's the customer? Who are the people who give us the money that pays our wages? Where do we put them on the diagram? If we can remember to get them on the diagram. Oftentimes, they're not going to be on the diagram. But if we do actually think about it, they'll be on the extreme right and left. Well, why is that? Well, in a factory, that is the case, isn't it? That's how you do stuff in a factory. But a factory is physical and it's real. We can actually see a car being produced and what happens to it. The rest of what we do isn't. It's a fabrication, but we create a fabrication that looks like a factory. And then we apply techniques and methods and approach which accordingly treat it as if it is a factory. So many of the techniques that we've got around, and Lean, Six Sigma, business improvement, all those sort of things, historically things like BPR, look at things as if they're in a value chain. Where does that come from? Value chain. It's another industrial metaphor. We talk about work taking place in the trenches. That's another metaphor brought from the past. So these organizations who are hugely successful with this stuff are looking at things in a different way. And you might sort of say, well, what's the different way they're looking at them? Well, as we've already said, our premise is you've got to put the customer in the diagram. And what's changed? The diagram. Nothing's physically changed. We changed the diagram. That changes our orientation to work forever. So we don't need to look in the second decade of the 21st century all like Scottish pin factories. It's bizarre if you think about it. We're all structuring ourselves on a model that the US adopted in the year of independence, which was 1776. And of course, that became the economic model that most of us have followed. Well, the news is that that passed its sell-by date at least a decade ago. So those organizations who are performing well are not doing this anymore. They're not putting the customer at the extreme. So we need to move our sights into the 21st century, away from that industrial mindset of left to right and top to bottom, and everything we do looking like a factory. Now, just to sort of finish on that theme is, you think about all our diagramming systems, all our representation systems, again, what's missing from them? Most of the time when I ask questions, I say, 50% of the time you answer customer, you will be correct, okay? Yes, the customer's not on the diagram. The reason why these things exist. So let's go back to this chart and let's see what it does to us in terms of our thinking. If you were this guy in operations, so he's 3 levels down under the operations division, you might quite rightly say as well, the end customer is not really my job because I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps away in the value chain from them that way, and I'm 1, 2, 3, I'm 4 steps away from them that way. The customer's not my job. The only reason the customer isn't everybody's job is because of the way we draw the organization chart. How ludicrous is that? So if you're talking, we'll go back to Apple again. In Apple, they'll talk about this principle that nobody is more than 2 degrees of separation away from the customer. Everybody is 2 degrees. So you can be in an Apple store, and within reason, you can talk to the CEO. You're 2 degrees of separation away from them. Well, how do you create an organization like that? Because most of us would think, yeah, the end customer's not really my job. Now, I don't get involved in that too much. And those of us who do know that the rest of them don't. 95% of the business doesn't. So moving forward, what are the sort of things that we can do in terms of thinking about that? Well, a new landscape is emerging, which is good, and that new landscape represents itself in different ways. So if you look at that red blob at the top of Amazon, who's that? Yes, customer. It's not the CEO, it's the customer. Now, Amazon has the virtue of looking familiar to us. It looks like a pyramid. But it's just an abstract of how we're organizing ourselves to do the work that we need to do. Now, I've not quite got my head around Facebook yet, but every one of those nodes is a customer, all right? It's a representation system that's relevant to the business that they're in. The one that you can see there, PPL, is a structure we call a heliogram, which is one of the ways that a particular car manufacturing company in Germany has structured itself, so that that big red blob in the middle is the customer, right? And those little orange blobs around it are what we refer to as successful customer outcomes. Now, interestingly enough, that diagram It's representing the business, just in the same way that Apple represents his business in this sort of way. And what they say is, how do you move to this? Well, what they say is, stop asking customers what they want, because they'll tell you. You create an expectation that you can't deliver against. You need to figure out what they need. So the best way I've got of articulating that and elaborating is, some of you will know where that is. Any guesses? Somewhere we like to take the kids, isn't it? Somewhere we like to go and relive our youth as well. Get on some of those crazy rides and listen to those stupid songs. It's a small world after all. If one that gets into your head, you just can't get rid of it. It's there forever, isn't it? It's a small world. Anyhow, so that's Disney. What did Disney do around outside in? Well, their phrase for it is something called True North. And what they say is that True North is real customer need. Want is usually at 90 degrees sort of left or right of True North. So they don't do voice of customer, they do needs of customer. And they figure it out by looking True North. So most of the time when you actually go and have a sort of a Disney experience, it's about meeting Mickey and people like that. And there's a lady at Disney who was sharing at our Florida conference in January a story. She's called Sue Page, and she's part of the BP group, and she's a director at Disney of customer services. And they do an annual survey. And in 2010, they did an annual survey of all the Disney locations around the world. And as people come into the park, they've got the ticket, they get through the gates, invariably they'll ask a lot of questions. And they can ask the questions of stage hands, people are out there sweeping the streets, could be the bottle washers, the window cleaners, anybody is a cast member at Disney. And customers like you and I ask questions. Now, around the world, what is the most commonly asked question in Disney in 2010 of you and I, customers arriving at the theme park? Yeah, where's the rides? It could be, where's Mickey? The most commonly asked question is, of course, you've had a long car journey, it's probably boiling hot, right? The kids are screaming, you're in the park, what's the first thing we all need to do? Toilets. We all need the toilets, we all need the washroom, right? So that's the most commonly asked question around the world. Excuse me, can you tell me where the toilets are? So we'd easily get that one. However, you will not get, unless you've heard this one before, the second most commonly asked question around the world. Any guesses? Second most commonly asked question in Disney. Right. The second most commonly asked question in Disney is, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? Now think about that. What time is the 3 o'clock parade? That's what the customer says they want to know. Well, you dumb schmuck, it's 3 o'clock. No, that's not the answer, is it? No, the answer is something else. So the folks at Disney use a particular technique to actually figure out what the real need is. And the need is hidden in the context of the question. So say, for instance, it's a young woman with 2 small kids. What she needs to know is, where is the high-rise place which is sheltered from this boiling hot sun, where she can get some fresh water and ice cream for the kids, and they can see Mickey coming out on the float. That's what she needs. Right? But the need can be variable depending on the category of customer that you've got. My needs will be different, right? So the answer isn't to give the question, it's 3 o'clock. No, that's not it. It's in the context of the question. So, of course, there's a scientific way of actually doing that. Now, it's not as though this stuff is really that new, is it? When Henry Ford was doing this back then, don't go and ask the customers what they want. They'll tell you. And you go and create it, and then they go, yeah, but it's not really doing what I need it to do. We need to go further than that. So, do you capture what the customer says they want, or do you go further than that and actually evaluate what the real customer needs are, even when they don't know it themselves? Until Apple invented the iPhone 4, I didn't know I needed one, right? I thought I needed a super-duper Nokia N95, right? No, Apple have figured out what our needs are, and they'll be doing some announcements very shortly on some more of that. Another aspect of this comes down to something called a customer experience. Now, some of us will have done things like customer journey mapping and stuff like that. Any of us in marketing might have done sort of customer touch points and things. But this permeates our total organization. If you think about that pyramidal structure that we're all in at the moment, many of us might not have had exposure to this idea of customer experience because the customer is not my job. Well, we've already said the reason for that is because we're drawing the diagram in the wrong way. So what do we mean by this customer experience? It's about understanding it. Back in 1997, this guy said, the customer experience is the process. And many of us back then nodded our heads politely and said, yeah, well, of course it is. Yeah, absolutely. And that's for those marketing and sales guys to go and figure out, isn't it? No, it's for every one of us to figure out. There was somebody apparently who was at that Apple World Developers Conference back in 1997 called Jeff Bezos. Anybody know who Jeff Bezos is? Yeah, he's the CEO of Amazon, isn't he? And one of the principles that he took away from that talk was that you've got to work backwards. Don't start with the technology. Start with the customer need and the experience and work backwards into your organization to actually create the alignment you need to do to achieve customer success, which is quite different from looking at the resources we've got, figuring out how best to use them, taking them to the market. So hence the expression outside in. It's about looking at our organization from the outside in. And that customer experience, we can articulate it. The other aspect of that is not about the appearance of our products and services, it's about how they actually physically work. So that was another insight that we were shared with back then. So what I would say to you is if you're still managing your processes in the task, functional, specialist, hierarchical Scottish pin factories, perhaps it's time to take a look at that and actually sort of say, what is our true successful customer outcome? And how do we deliver that experience? And I love it when some people say, you know, you've got to exceed expectations. That's the way to go. How can you exceed expectations? Because as soon as you've done that, right, you've created another expectation at a different level. No, you've got to manage expectations. So understand the experience, which is the process, right? That's what we do every day. Articulate it from the point of view of a successful customer outcome. Redraw the diagram with the customer in the middle, and bingo, we're on our way. The other aspect of process thinking as well, that's really been a bit of a sort of a ball and a chain to us, is this idea that we measure process success in terms of the output and activity time. Elapsed time, average touch time, average handle time in call centers and that sort of thing. Are you really measuring success when you do that? One of the aspects of this is if any of us do scorecarding and KPIs, metrics management, get the metrics out that you measure success by. And regardless of who your type of customer is, look at your metrics. And then do this red, amber, green analysis. Mark in red all those measures which are measures of output and activity and task. And mark in green all those measures which are measures of outcomes and results. You will typically find, if you haven't done this before, 80% of your current measures will be measures of activity and task. Right? Not the outcome you're trying to achieve. Of course, the reverse is applied when we go outside in. The number of measures we need to have significantly reduces, and we're now measuring ourselves based on the outcome we're trying to achieve and the result we're trying to deliver. Well, it's quite a different world order then, because we don't reward people then for doing dumb stuff like getting off the phone quickly, right? When that might not necessarily be aligned with a successful customer outcome. The other aspect of this as well, which is about the customer experience, comes across very strongly when you look at case studies around this, and there's a few that we mentioned in the book, is where do your processes start and end? So do they start with a call and finish when you've send the invoice out and that sort of thing? Or do they actually start with a real need, right, and finish only when that's actually delivered and satisfied? So the scope of process changes. So whether it's internal or working with your primary customers or out into your value chain, the actual scope of what we're doing, again, changes. And it's quite, I'll give you one illustration of that. British Airways, I have the dubious distinction of having to fly with them occasionally, measure one of their key processes as ticket to carousel. So in other words, from when you buy the ticket to when you get your bag off the carousel. And classically, that's the way people did it. They'd measure, you know, procurement to pay, all those sort of things. But is that really a real game anymore? Because what Southwest Airlines do are the most consistently profitable airline in the US, and the second largest carrier of people in the US, they said, no, it doesn't start at the ticket and it doesn't finish at the carousel. It starts when the customer has the need, and it ain't over until you finish your journey. Now, of course, you go, well, we're not in that business. Well, again, that's another issue. What business are you in? And oftentimes, people will describe the business that they're in by what they do, not the outcome of what they achieve. So British Airways would say, oh, we're in the airline business. No, Southwest said, no, we're in the business of moving people. And one of the smart things they've done is in collaboration with Marriott, is they allow you when you're checking out of your hotel to check in for this evening's flight. Oh, that's cool from a customer point of view. It improves customer service. It also reduces costs because you're removing all the people that you need at the airport to process people who are no longer going to need to be processed. Right? It also improves the cost ratios in the sense that they can now negotiate with the baggage handling people to get their bags of their customers injected into the process when it's quiet. So they pay 30% less for baggage handling. So they're winning the triple crown. They're improving customer service, growing revenues, and reducing costs simultaneously. So in terms of these things, they're pretty straightforward. Now, I've already shown you this diagram. Let's elaborate on the diagram. I talked about Disney's True North. And what that allows you to do is to link every single task and activity right the way through, outputs, outcomes, customer outcomes, and successful customer outcomes, right to the customer. So this diagram is what we refer to as a heliogram. Copernicus, anybody recall who Copernicus was back in the Middle Ages? He was the guy who put forward this weird and wacky theory that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. In fact, the sun was the center of our solar system. Of course, he was laughed out of court, and it took the Roman Catholic Church until what year? The guy died in, I think it was 1453, somewhere around about then. The Catholic Church finally acknowledged